everyone on Instagram. We're back with another live, and as we wait, Rene, for going live on YouTube, I wanted to show you the book that I was referring to last week when we sort of discussed in more details, what it means to be a child of a parent that moved overseas to a new culture, and what it means to acculturate to very different cultural conditions and climate conditions in the case of the child that we were referring to last week. So yeah, again, this is the book. It's very highly recommended. It's very thick, but full of beautiful stories. As you can see, there is a lot of markings here on my part. And it's just kind of the Bible for people who have been children of parents traveling overseas and living very mobile lives, whether it was because your parents were missionaries or working in the military or as diplomats, or maybe they were assigned for a few years by the company to work in a different country, or just out of job-seeking situations, and so on and so on. Yeah. So yeah, how are you feeling, Rene?
I'm doing great. Thank you for sharing the book that we actually got to talk about. It was really nice we introduced it, and we actually got to share a bit from it, and also share your story on the client on how we can apply this knowledge as we get to divulge it. Maybe this time we'll also get to mention it, because on this particular live we're continuing with the same question of question 6 of the physical abuse. We're still continuing on the physical abuse. My parent very often was push, grabs up and throws something at her, and I just wanted to share a story, possibly, that now that just mentioning that YouTube is up there. Welcome YouTube again, just to for plagiarism. Yeah.
Yeah.
A story to help us understand again this particular question. So I just want to refer to episode we did. I believe it was episode, I think 10. It's been so long. We're almost on 25 episode. Can you imagine that, Nicholas? So on that episode, I got to share of a lady who felt that when you are not abusive towards her, you do not qualify to be with her. And that lady, we got to share her story in the context of relationships as an adult, but getting to know how she is right now and getting to know how she grew up. So what she told me about how she grew up is that she grew up in a household whereby, uh, interestingly, the classical situation is whereby the man is seen as the more aggressive one. We're seen as males are the ones who are more aggressive, the ones who are perpetrating this kind of violence. But in her home, it was the mother who was more aggressive and violent towards her father. And this happened very early on. She grew up with two older sisters, and they got to witness her mother be very aggressive, and mostly it was very verbal, and then sometimes very physical. A few times were very physical, and when it was physical, it really struck to her those moments. And how her father used to respond is that her father was he really tried to create the balance. He never really got to enact his own force on his wife, but he used to tell this young lady that, I really love your mother. Your mother is a great woman. She's a magnificent mother. She's a great wife. I really love her. And I think he was trying to keep the peace in that home. But what happened was this lady got to see that violence was a form of connection with her to her father, because the father generally was very good to her. The father was very good to her. The father did not enact any abuse to her. Actually, did not enact any abuse really much to the mother herself. And so even when it comes to wondering, did the father deserve this kind of acts of violence? Not really. Maybe just her mother was just that kind of personality. She did mention that the mother also had some issues of herself, whereby she did not like physical touch at all. She did not like hugging. She did not at all like that. So but the father really tried to keep the peace between uh them, and also try not to taint the image of the mother to her children, to his children. So I got to find that story very fascinating, whereby now she feels like if there's no violence in her home, then what's the point of connection? Because she felt connected to her father through the violence of her mother. And I found that very curious, in that can we actually get to understand how this experience affected her. So what do you think about that case, Nicholas?
Yeah, very interesting details you're bringing forward here. I think I, I I'd be willing to speculate that there are actually three interconnected layers in this story, for which your hypothesis of physical violence becoming associated with connection is possible. The first layer is that, you know, like father, like son, and like mother, like daughter, right? Like, maybe I'm not saying the saying right, but everybody
Yeah.
understands here, right? So daughters mimic their mothers to know how to be in the world, and sons mimic their father, right? And sometimes it can be the opposite. You can have a cross sort of modeling situation, but that's kind of the norm, right? So the mother is being physically abusive towards the father. The daughter doesn't like that. The daughter sees the abuse. Uh, but what she also learns is that the way I connect is through violence. So there are two outcomes here. Either the daughter completely refuses violence, so she goes completely the other side where violence is inadmissible in her couple, or she admits violence but then tries to counterbalance her experience of seeing the abuse towards the father and the sadness that caused her by being the person that is abused, right? In any case, she sees that a model that is important to her connects with the other partner through physical violence. Then there is the layer indeed of that you have pointed out, whereby if the father is getting abused, there is a chance for intimacy between the daughter and the father, right? There's a chance for closeness and intimacy there. So conflict and abuse is connected there to this layer of intimacy. Um, and then the third layer that I'm seeing here is, I forgot. um, what is it? Oh, it just escaped me.
Yeah.
Yeah, there is definitely a few different layers. Um,
Is a
oh,
layer also how she wants to deal with a partner who is also abusive? Is that also a layer? Because you mentioned the layer between the father and the wife, her and the father. Another layer is maybe between her as an adult, and I don't. Okay, maybe getting to know about her siblings is different, but yeah, just getting to share on that. So I think those two layers are also strong layers of abuse and connection. Just maybe
you
to jog
said
your
something
train of thought.
at the beginning that made me think, oh yes, this is a layer of connection, and I just forgot that element there. What you said
Mm,
before. Um, by the way, today I'm a little triggered and therefore a little bit in a state of anxiety. And
mm,
bang, as soon as I'm hit by certain levels of anxiety, my memory recall just goes out a little bit out of the window. Working memory is affected, like we have often mentioned in this channel, right? So many of our viewers experience this. So I'm happy to share that this happens to me as well, and live as well. So there was an element of the story. So if you can just go back to the way that you were telling the story, I'm sure I'll be able to reconnect to that. Um,
absolutely. Yeah, I think what I was sharing on is that, like you said, you're able to connect that the father was trying to really create the balance between himself and the child,
yeah,
and yeah, and the mother and the child, through telling the children that, you know, your mother is a great person. I really love your mother. She's a good wife. And getting to try and create that balance whereby he was not abusive to his children. He didn't do much really to trigger the wife. And the wife, I got to mention, maybe it's a good fact that maybe you might have slipped to other people's mind, that she did not like to get physically touched. She did not like to.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you,
Yeah.
thank you, thank you very much.
She didn't like physical contact. Yeah.
Okay, so that's so important what you're saying that there, because touch, it's such a primary need in the human experience, and particularly highly important in the experience of a small child, because touch is literally the first language that human beings use to co-regulate, to regulate emotions and the organs, the digestive system, cognition, emotionality, all happens through the language of touch, right? As we learn languages, we grow older, you and I can speak, and that's why talk therapy is so powerful. You and I can speak about our internalized experiences, and through the effect of words, which are essentially sounds and therefore sensations, right? They're vibrations, we can regulate and co-regulate down those emotions. But as a child, you don't know how to speak, you don't know how to use language as a regulatory tool or technology. We call it a psychotechnology. And so touch is the most fundamental way in which children regulate. If a mother is not able to provide the healthy amount of touch to the child, that child feels neglected. His or her sense of regulation is lower. His or her sense of being is more vague. So the real sense of existence, that I am alive, that I'm here, that I'm grounded, we also say, fades away, becomes more vague. And his or her sense of where they are, like how physically distant or proximate they are to things and to people, also becomes more vague. So one way in which this child may try to recuperate that loss of physical intimacy and all the components I just mentioned is through violent contact. Violent contact is much, much, much more welcomed than no contact at all. We spoke with one of our interviewees last week as we're preparing to bring them on live on the show. And I remember us mentioning how in some hospitals during the 40s or 50s, I think there had been this policy throughout the States that premature babies should not be touched. And for several years, these hospitals were having 100% mortality. So basically, if the baby was born premature, it was condemned to death anyway. And then there was only one hospital that was doing things differently. And they would let mothers touch these babies. And if the mothers were not there, the nurses were handling these babies overboard. Now, the reasoning behind not letting the babies being touched was to not corrupt the immunity system through viruses and bacteria and so on, right? What people did not understand back then is that the immunity system is a function of stimulation. In the same way that the immunity system is a function of bacterial stimulation in the gut system, it is also a function of touch. Your immunity system gets stronger as you get more pressure and stimulation of your muscles, your fascia, and all the sensors that are on this body, right? Literally, whenever I touch you, I'm sending signals to your brain. Those signals are being processed, and that keeps the brain healthy, right? So if you don't get the touch, your brain just slowly dies, like it's like not giving water to a plant. And this is why, for example, options like when people are suffering a lot, options like self-injury, of like self-cutting, for example, of self-burning, or pinching or scratching, right? Giving these very strong sensations on the skin are so effective and literally addictive,
Mm,
because the body cannot do without a certain level of stimulation. It
mm,
will do anything to get the stimulation that it needs if it can. Um, there is this beautiful, beautiful example of a baby. This patient goes to a therapist, and they have been hospitalized many times because they are having trouble with eating. I think it's the case of an anorexia, I think. Anyway, the therapist does a lot of work on this person, and they dig a bit deeper into their past and so on, and they go deeper and deeper, and they find out that at some point the mother had stopped giving breast milk to the child very abruptly, very
mm,
abruptly. And so this child had gone through a shock, like a developmental shock, basically, and what would be then classified as a trauma. Um, and after that, the child would always refuse um, the bottle, the bottle. And if they did take the bottle, they did so by ripping their hair off,
mm,
apparently. And so they were now semi-adults, I think adolescents. They were basically almost bald, um, and still having issues with eating. And as the therapist was investigating, um, it turns out, and I'm sort of cutting short the story here, but it turns out that the nipple of the mother, and this was actually verified later with the mother, um, the nipple of the mother had a lot of coarse hair around the nipple. So
mm.
whenever the mother was giving breast milk to the child, the coarse hair would tickle the upper lip and the bases of the nose. And this sensation had been associated with nurturing.
Mm,
So later, when this shock happened, when the shock and the interruption of the breast milk happened, the child was pulling their hair off and bringing them near the nose to tickle
mm.
themselves, to
Wow.
produce that stimulation of hunger towards the milk. And
Mm,
it took months and months and months for the child to find that. So throughout that
wow.
period in which the child experiences that shock and that removal of the nurturing aspect, because they have associated this tickling with the nurturing, and if there is no tickling, there is no nurturing in their brain, right? Throughout that period, the brain is trying to resolve this puzzle, until
Mm,
by haphazard coincidence, they pull some air, and maybe the hair is still in their hands there, and they tickle themselves, and the bottle is near them, and they finally manage to sort of eat again well, right? Of course, for all these
mm,
months, they were still getting nurture at some level, but not easily, right?
mm,
That shows you how important touch is. That shows you how important skin stimulation is, right? And again, I probably could tell this story in better details and more clearly, but more or less the gist of it is that. And it's just
and,
illustrative, right? So
and
again, the stimulation of the skin organ is fundamental to emotion regulation in general. And violence is going to be preferred to no stimulation at all. Yeah, thank you for this incredible little detail that you just injected
yeah.
into a story that indeed we talked about 15 episodes ago, but that only
Yeah.
now can go that much deeper, right? And this is how exactly, Rene, how talk therapy works. This is
Yeah.
how exactly how talk therapy works. It's like we tell a story, right? My client comes to me, they tell a story, and that story may not make too much sense at the beginning, or if it does make sense, we explore those meanings. But then 10 sessions later, there is this little detail that, oh, I happen to remember that, right?
Mm.
They inject that, and then suddenly we are in the realm of, oh, why was your mother so not able to touch you? That really
Mm.
points to grave trauma, potentially sexual abuse in the life of the mother.
Yeah.
And that just reverts the polarities of who is responsible for what and who could do what, right? Who could provide what and why it was not provided, and so on and so on and so on. So
Absolutely.
fantastic.
And
Yeah.
and yeah, I
What are
think
you,
as we're
what
coming
are
actually
your
to the close of this discussion, absolutely, as we're coming to the close of this discussion, getting to understand how this lady, how you just explained infancy, whereby for this lady, it feels like she gets to see that when it comes to even the as a relationship, it's like you can say the infancy stage of a relationship, that physical touch, which like you said can be violence, is a qualifying. And if it's not there, if we see the infant as the relationship, the infant dies. So I think that's how she see it, in the same way, whereby when she's about to bring, breathing life to this quote unquote relationship, life to it is that get into it, give it life. She wants to know, will there be a touch to it? A violent touch, but touch all in all. And if there's none, then why bring it life to the first place? Why don't
absolutely.
just go
And isn't a violent man a much higher guarantee that that touch is going to be there than a
yeah,
man that is not violent and who might withdraw from touch much more easily? Like, you have to
absolutely.
have a lot of passion and like and a lot of less control to be violent, right? Like something needs to overcome you, and then you're violent towards somebody. That overcoming, to me, who is craving for touch, is a guarantee that I am going to get that touch, because your
Mm.
mental screening and filtering is not stopping that passion, right? So
Mm.
I crave for that passion in a way that is unhealthy at a certain level, but in a way that is so totally legitimate and justifiable, and so healthy in a sense, if when we come down to the very, very basics of the life that animates the child, which is still in that
Mm.
adult, by the way, right?
Yeah.
As you mentioned. So beautiful. Yes, I love your comment there. Yeah, great. Well, we've come to the end of another live.
Yeah.
So these little sections of All About Trauma go very quickly. We are working hard, you and I, Rene, to bring on new interviewers and
Yeah.
talk about trauma in context and all these developmental sort of parameters that influence our psychology later. And we definitely look forward to the next live next Saturday. Correct, Rene?
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing, and thank you for helping us give some insight, just encouraging those who are watching that you can still support these efforts that we make to come in and bring in the materials, bring in the guests, bring the insight, bring in the books to help us to better understand this story of trauma and get to go through these questions. I believe next slide we're going to the seventh question that we'll be able to uncover together, and so I'm very looking forward to it. So when there's a guest and we get to share these things and bring it back to light in the stories of different people all around the world. So thank you again, Nicholas, for joining, for having this discussion and getting to engage with our audience and getting to engage with the subject. So I think that's it for today, man. Bye bye. Thank you,
Thank you.
Nicholas.